clear in the title of the program. One of my favorites when I was introduced to the music was Moran Murray, which you're going to be playing. Also, there's a hilarious song by Tobias Hume that got me into sort of a comedic side of it, but he writes some really beautiful melancholic pieces as well. So I'm very, very interested in this period and these periods. I guess we're playing multiple periods of music today. But let's talk a little bit about that while we have some tea. So again, everybody, a big welcome to Martin, and we're going to start our tea talk.
Okay. Thank you all.
And one moment. Okay. So, it seems important to mention that the Tea Talk is being sponsored by a charity called the International Tea Appreciation Society. That's my other hat. I'm a part of the society, and we're teamed up with JagaSilk essentially to bring these this part of the talk. So the Tea Society is involved, and I would love people to be aware of October 22nd, where there's going to be the Victoria Tea Festival Revival happening on, and it's going to be a tea symposium. There's going to be a tea fair. It's going to be quite lovely. Sorry? Oh, where is it going to be? Oh, that's a very good question. It's going to be right in Court, and we're also working with the Pacific School of Creative Inquiry to hold the symposium down in where the Maritime Museum used to be. And then there's going to be tables throughout. It's the 6th year that the festival's been held, but for the last 2 years it's been completely online because of the pandemic. So, and the first year we pivoted to pandemic, it was, for the pandemic, it was 24 hours of symposium. Oh my gosh. So Martin, going to start with a Fuding Dabai Hao. So this is one of my favorite cold brew teas that we've created. This is a silver needle. It is a sort of like the champagne, you know how a champagne sparkling wine kind of idea. To qualify as a true silver needle, it needs to be made with this particular cultivar, which is the Fuding Dabai Hao, and it just gives you a really exquisite introduction to white teas. So cheers.
Yeah. It's delicious.
Good. Very happy to hear it. It's also a very old tea. You want to talk to us a little bit about your musical career? It's quite illustrious. You've been with the symphony.
Well, I played with the symphony for 41 years, but it was my day job, and everything that I was ambitious to do was outside the symphony.
Okay.
So it was a really good career. I enjoyed playing in the symphony, but I was happy to give it up and just do my other things.
Right, which happened in 2019?
In 2019, I turned 65 and I retired.
Amazing, okay.
Good timing.
And then these other things that keep you busy are the
Well, the Viola Da Gamba, basically.
Right.
I took the Viola Da Gamba up late in life. My teacher at university was a well-known Viola Da Gamba player, but she would berate her viol students, saying that they only took up the Viola Da Gamba because they couldn't play the cello. So I decided I wasn't going to be one of those, and I never did learn to play the cello well enough to prove to her that I was a good enough cellist. So I just kept working at it, and I got a job here, and that was happy times for me, except that I never learned to play Viola Da Gamba as a kid, so I've taken it up in my mid-years, and it's taking me longer to learn the Viola Da Gamba than it took me to learn the cello. It's a slow process.
I hear it's quite challenging. 7 strings, correct?
Well, there's 6 or 7 strings.
6 or 7.
It's a very different instrument from the cello. It has frets, and the bow hand is quite different. You hold the bow in the opposite way from the cello, so it uses a completely different set of muscles.
And it's strung completely differently too, right? The bow itself is.
Well, the bow has it's with horsehair.
Okay.
Yeah. The way it's held, it turns out there are many ways of holding, and that's my recent exploration. And then it turns out because the Viola da Gamba was very popular for over 200 years, there's a big variety of viols as well, which I have now over the years collected some of, and so that's, I think, one of my main purposes of this session is to show the different sounds, the different sizes, and basically the different repertoire for these instruments.
So that difference is because of maybe the countries they're from, or the era that they were created in, or a combination of the two?
It's all of the
all
above.
of that?
Yeah. In different countries there were different ambitions, but it mainly has to do with the era.
Right.
So the original Viola da Gambas came from Spain to Italy. They were brought there at the time that Isabella was throwing out all the infidels,
Right.
and at the same time as well, Spain's imperial ambitions extended to Italy. So a bunch of Spanish people took over Naples, for instance, and that is one of the places where the Viola da Gamba then became popular, because the instrument came from Spain. The way of playing stringed instruments with a bow actually came from the Far East and traveled through the Silk Road into the Middle East, and that's where it then made its way to Europe. And of course, with all the Moors in Spain, they played various instruments that were bowed the way this instrument is bowed, but they took the Spanish vihuela, which is that's basically the same word as the Italian word viola. They took that instrument, which was a 6-string guitar-like instrument, and started bowing it the way the Middle Easterners would bow. Of course, they had to put a different bridge on it, but basically it's a bowed guitar, which is why I brought this instrument out, which I don't think everybody can see from this seating.
Right.
Maybe I'll move back for a second
Yeah,
so they can have an idea what I'm holding.
I can hold that.
So it's about the size of the guitar, and it has 6 strings like a guitar, and it's tuned very like a guitar, except that the third, the narrower interval, is in the middle rather than between the second and third strings. I'll maybe just play a little bit.
Okay.
Very soft, very sweet. I'll move back a bit.
Okay, fantastic. Beautiful. that's so. The history of this instrument I find so fascinating, also because of how it's sort of interacted with the creation of orchestras as well, right? Like, it seems to have a fuller voice, where there was less instrumentation at the time. And correct me if I'm wrong. This is just
the big invention of the Renaissance was Renaissance harmony, or I should say music. In the medieval period, I don't know how many of you have musical training, but the intervals of a fourth and a fifth were the foundation of medieval music. And in England in the 1400s, folk musicians started making the interval of a major third an important foundation of the music, and that caught on all over Europe. So the Renaissance style of music actually began in England, and these instruments then had to be retuned to fit so that the major thirds sounded in tune. It's a complicated mathematical thing that I don't think I want to go into.
Right, sure.
But the notes in the scale that we know do not fit into an octave. Right. You have to make compromises, and in the here they compromised or they didn't compromise, they just said thirds are dissonance. They sound terrible, so we're not going to use them.
Oh wow. Okay.
And in the Renaissance, they decided that thirds sounded good, but they had to retune all the fourths and fifths, so they were out of tune.
Oh, wow.
And that's basically the basis of our harmony today is still based on thirds being relatively in tune, although in the last century that has been sacrificed to what we call equal temperament, where now the fourths and fifths are more in tune and the thirds are out of tune. And pianos have been designed so that they sound not too bad when they play thirds, but they're really still very out of tune.
Oh, interesting. That's fascinating. So when you move from the cello to the viola da gamba,
Yes, yes.
You then have to make that you basically need to make that transformation.
Well,
you need to find a very different way of interacting with an instrument that at face value looks similar. Obviously, they're all, but there is that lineage and that connection, and to go sort of back in time and explore those
are all issues, but the tuning issue really affects cello as well.
Right.
If you're playing Baroque music or even classical music, you really should be aiming for in-tune thirds.
Right.
And it's not until the 20th century that the thirds got sacrificed.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. So I find it. Where's my question? So one of the things that I found really fascinating was during the era there wasn't as much of a sort of a universal sense of what being in tune meant, and that different instrument makers would be tuning their instruments to a different sense of what was perfectly in tune.
Of course. I mean, you listen to world music, and they don't. The various cultures do not base their scale on the 12-tone system that we use, which, for me, makes the Western culture takeover of the world a real pity, because now all these musical groups all over the world, because the instruments and the computers are all based on the 12-tone system,
right,
their music is now colored. It's lost its flavor.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah, I know a person who makes, I think it was clarinets, but he also makes duduk.
Oh, yes.
An ancient Armenian instrument.
Yeah.
He's often using an online tuner for tuning that. I wonder if he's experiencing similar struggles, an ancient instrument being tuned to modern tastes.
Yes. Well, violins, for instance, have taken the place of rebab, which was the bowed instrument I was talking about, which became the rebec in the medieval period. And my first year at university, I got intrigued by the idea of playing in a Middle Eastern Middle Eastern Iranian string orchestra.
Very cool.
And I took 2 classes, and then I had to drop the course because I simply could not bend my ears around the scale that he was trying to teach us. It was, for me, so foreign that I knew that I would have to stop playing my own style of music in order to take it up. It was really disappointing. I mean, he was a really nice guy, and I wanted to take his class, and I thought, I'm just not built for this.
It's like learning 2 languages at the exact same time.
But Douglas Hensley, who was here, was
Yeah.
going to the same school.
Oh, wow.
And he was able to do it. So he ended up being one of the teachers of Iranian music, I should say, in Paris, because there weren't enough native Iranian people teaching this style. So it was my problem. I just didn't have the talent.
Well, we're all
different.
Yeah, I actually personally struggle even just with understanding sheet music. So I can repeat when people are singing something close to what they're singing, but you try and get me to read notes, and I struggle so hard.
Yeah.
So I have huge respect for people who have a good command of musical theory and who can also explore musical theory in different cultures. It's just, I find it so amazing and incredible.
Yeah.
I also am curious, another friend of mine who studies ancient music, he really enjoys the rhythms of say, gypsy traditions. Do you find that when you're exploring this and working with Viola Da Gamba and you're working with this older music, that there's a huge rhythmic change, or I guess a lot of that must be interpretation?
Well, there is. I'm getting out of my comfort zone again.
Okay.
So I don't deal as much with complicated rhythms, but they
Okay.
definitely exist. In the 1400s, it was amazing what people were doing.
Very cool. Okay, awesome. Yeah. What do you think? Okay. What do you think is the biggest draw for you? What is drawing you to this music? Why you were saying like you did so many years in the symphony playing the cello, and now that you've retired, you've decided to really focus on what your true ambition is, which is working with these older instruments. What is it that causes that interest or that draw?
Well, when I was younger, it was a search for the truth.
Okay.
Somehow I had this idea that if I could get inside a composer's head,
Yeah.
I could find the right way to play the music, and then that kind of evolved into, well, what sounds was the composer hearing?
Right.
So along the same time as what I consider at any rate the modern Baroque revolution, where people started playing instruments that were actually sounding more like the period that the piece was written.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that was a revelation, and I was basically a teenager and university age when that was all going on. So it's all very exciting for me, and I got caught up in it and wanted to know more. Later on, and I think everybody who gets involved in early music has this time in their development, you begin to realize that there is no truth.
Right. Yeah.
You
Fair.
really have to come up with what works for you, and it's not. Yes, you can do all the research you want, but you simply cannot find the absolute truth.
One of my favorite musicians, as I told you, is Jordi Savall, and he
Yeah.
often says that it's a living history. It's not like a museum performance that you're trying to somehow recreate something that existed at that time, because that's impossible.
That's
but
right.
you can reinterpret it, and you can keep it alive, and you can sort of have it inspire or it can be the foundation of what you are working on today. But a lot of it is intuition, a lot of it is interpretation.
And of course it is, because we don't have recordings from the time, and we don't have the same situations
Right.
that people played in.
Right. The different rooms that they were in.
Oh,
or
yeah. And the whole culture is
Right.
completely different. People come to performances for different reasons.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. And during this time period that you're going to be playing through, of course, there would have been many different situations. And I do folk music, and I know, when I'm playing, and I'm not as well, I don't tour, etc. But even just different spaces, restaurants versus we were at a pub, or not a pub, it was like a distillery, etc. It just a very different way of performing the same music. So I can imagine even today this is going to be interesting, playing outside.
And I was here yesterday, getting used to this space,
Right.
and now there's more wind, and it's a whole different experience. Start all over.
Hey, there we go. Yeah. But the acoustics are pretty nice in here. We found,
Yeah.
and the brick and there's a little bit of kind of bouncing around, but it seems to find itself.
Yeah.
So I am hoping that it works for you in the end, and that you enjoy it.
Well, I hope so. I asked you when you were first describing this, I said, this is going to be more like background music, isn't it? And you said no. And I went, oh, I'm in trouble.
No, we're all here for the music, right? Yeah, and a little bit of tea.
Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, did we have any questions from the audience for Martin?
Martin, do you find the temperature with the wind, is that playing havoc at all?
I will let you know. Fortunately, I'm just playing by myself. When it's several people, it can be a real nightmare. But I figure as long as I'm more or less in tune with myself, the biggest issue is that I'm playing different sized instruments, even though they're the same pitch. Well, some of them I'm playing at a whole tone higher than others, and so there's that. But the different sizes of instruments is driving me nuts. It takes me usually close to a week to feel really comfortable with an instrument, and here I'm playing 4 or 5 instruments in an hour and a half, and I have meltdowns pretty frequently, so you have to be pretty well, just patient with me as I try to sort out where my fingers belong.
It's in different hats and different head spaces.
Oh yeah, and I can't keep it all in my head. I'm retired now. I'm an old guy. I don't have that ability to change suddenly into some new person.
Sure. No, and on that note, in between instruments, Martin's asked me to step in, and that was a great opportunity to just talk to you a little bit about the tea that you'll be drinking. So it'll be a nice segue while he's.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to play the next instrument.
Or it'll be like a 1-week intermission. Right?
Right.
We should be okay. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, Mark.
What difference do the frets make, especially when it comes to bowing?
The frets are not there for helping me to play in tune. They're there to make the sound of the string more like an open string. So when you press your finger down on the string, it's a soft contact, and it makes what we call on a regular string is a kind of fleshy sound. For instance, on the cello, you can either put your finger down on its tip where the bone is hard and get a very kind of ringing sound, or you can put the finger down flat where it's soft and fuzzy, and you get a more warm sound. On these instruments, the ideal is to sound as much as possible like an open string. So in 40 years of orchestra playing, I avoided open strings all the time because they didn't like that sound. But on these instruments, it's just the opposite. You want to sound as much as possible like an open string all the time.
It's a very, very different perspective.
It's a completely different aesthetic.
It's fascinating. It must be a really interesting journey.
Yeah. So, for instance, when you play a regular stringed instrument, where you put your finger is where the note sounds. When you play a fretted instrument, you actually put your finger behind the fret. So I got in trouble in orchestra a lot because I would practice viol all day, and then I'd go play an orchestra rehearsal. My fingers were going down where they go on the viol, and of course it was not a tune.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. But now you get to focus all that energy.
That's
all
right.
And you're going to. It's just going to get, I guess, more and more ingrained. And those 1 weeks will turn into.
I hope so. Yeah, I did a concert like this about 15 years ago.
Oh wow. Okay.
And it was a huge challenge, and I vowed never to play multiple instruments in a solo recital again.
15 years later.
Here I am.
That's awesome. Okay, well, very exciting then. So this is the first time in 15 years for you to do a solo recital with 4 instruments?
And it's the first time solo recital of Viola Da Gamba entirely.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
So where
The
you've
other
just
one
gone...
was half cello,
half cello, half Viola Da Gamba. So
Yeah,
this is the
right.
first full Viola. Wow, okay.
Yes.
Amazing.
Diving in the deep end.
Very much looking forward to it. Okay, fantastic. I think this is a good moment to take a short break before we come back for the music at 1.
Okay.
But if there was any just final questions before we go, or if you had any final comments that you wanted to make, Martin, about the program that we're about to hear.
It is a journey through time. I've discovered that my ability to pull off all of these pieces is pretty spotty. So there might be times when I rather than play an entire piece and suffer through it with you, I might, for instance, walk through it with you, talk about it. It might be that kind of thing. I definitely will do that with the Marais.
Okay.
Because it's one of the most popular pieces he ever wrote. I thought, well, I better do this piece, and I think I have more useful things to say about it than my playing would indicate. so I'll walk you through that piece, and then you can get a really good recording. Jordi Saval plays it beautifully, and it's really commonly available on the net, and that'll be just the way it happens to today.
Wonderful. No, that sounds exciting. I'm really stoked. And Martin is being quite humble, but I did hear this sound check yesterday, and I got pretty stoked. So yeah.
I didn't play the Boreas.
Oh, okay. If you do open up your program, you will see a little bit about what we're going to be hearing today, Renaissance through the Baroque and Beyond. Also, if you'll note underneath the bio about Martin and a number of the institutions and societies that he's involved in, there is a list of the 4 instruments that he'll be playing. It starts when you see I'm going to brutalize the names, but Ganassi, Ortiz, and Dalla Casa. You're going to see, say, Renaissance bass viol by Richard Jones. That's the name of the instrument, so you can see that he's connected the songs to the instruments that he's going to be playing. So you can check that out in the program. Also, if you leaf through to, I guess, the second page, hard to see here, but you can also get a sense of how today is going to be presented, but there's also going to be some of the teas that you're going to be enjoying. So the first tea that we'll be serving to you will be this tea that we're drinking right now, this Yin Zen, a silver needle. This is one of my favorite cold brews that we do. This is a new project at JagaSilk where we're cold brewing the tea for 3 days. We're bottling them in these champagne bottles, and then we're pasteurizing them. We don't normally pasteurize, say, our kombucha, because that would destroy the whole point of making kombucha. But by pasteurizing them in the bottle, they do have a little bit longer shelf life. But it also, it's just, I love serving them in the champagne bottles. There's something so awesome about it. And when you cold extract, you don't bring out very many of the bitters or the acid, so it gets very fruity and very floral. So I really encourage you when you're drinking these out of the champagne flutes to enjoy that texture, to enjoy that aromatic, and to really focus especially on this tea. The finish is just next level. So yeah, and then that's going to be served with you're going to get a little blackberry roll cake. Let us know if you'd like another slice, but we're going to serve a little piece with your tea today, and there should be 4 teas, and I'll talk about the next one when Martin gives me the cue. So. All right. So thank you so much, and we'll be back for the music to start at 1 o'clock.
Okay. Five strings or 4 strings, or even with only 3 strings, you can still play the viol. So he really wants people to take up the viol. And these are his first 2 pieces to teach people how to play. And he wrote them in 2 versions. One was staff notation, but for people who have trouble reading the staff notation, he did a version in tablature. The interesting thing to me is that the 2 don't match, so even though they're on the same page, I spent a long time trying to sort out, well, wait a minute, why is this different? And in what way is it different? Because it's almost impossible to read. And I must admit, this week I finally broke down and just wrote it down in modern notation, because I figured I'd be too frazzled today to play it from the notation I showed you all. So here we go. I'll tune up my instrument and we'll get going. that's the staff notation version. The other one has, the tablature version has more notes, and a couple of different notes. That was a cheerful little piece. It's hard to believe it was written in the 1500s. It sounds very tonal, just like a folk song from much more recent. The second piece, the two versions are more different, and one sounds considerably more old, and then the tablature version sounds much more modern. And I don't know why they're so different, but I think it has to do with musica ficta. In the Renaissance and in the Renaissance and even in the early Baroque, they didn't mark all the accidentals. You were supposed to figure out just by knowing the rules of composition when to play accidentals, and you can hear quite a different effect in the first version, which has really only one accidental, and it's a really bizarre one, and the second version where the accidentals all make sense.
did the word rechercar mean back then? I usually think of it as a fancy fugue, but this obviously isn't it.
The word actually, the English translation would be research.
Yes.
It's to look again, and it basically means to practice. So the word we use today is étude in French, or study in English. But basically these are just études for the practice of people learning to play the instrument. And that's what rechercar means. It's just a way to practice, and the fancy fugues are a way to practice writing fancy fugues. Diego Ortiz wrote the next method that I'm quoting, and this is probably the most famous Renaissance method. He was not as interested in how to play the instrument, so whereas the Ganassi went on about how to hold the instrument and that you should be making faces to show the emotion in the music, which I didn't do today, sorry about that. But anyway, Ortiz was much more interested in improvisation, and he wanted to show how you could add more notes to the music that's written. And he had various ways of doing it. He had, for instance, what he called the perfect way, which is when you play a note, say a long note, like a whole note, you can fill it in with other notes as long as you come back to the same note before you move on to the next one. And this book is full of examples. So I'll just play a few of the first examples of the first first type of improvisation, the perfect one. So if you want to go from one note to the next, he doesn't even put in a clef. He just lets you choose which note to start on. So I'll start on this note and go to this note. So he shows those two notes. And if you want to go from one to the other and add some notes, or if you want to go from this note to that note, you can go, or from this note to this note. Or if you want to go fifth, so it always comes back to the same note before he does the next. And that way, when you're playing in a group of players who are playing contrapuntal music, you know you won't make any mistakes and cause bad parallels. We've all heard about parallel fifths. So anybody who's taken a music course, don't write parallel fifths. Well, this is a way to avoid making bad parallels. But then he says there's another way where you can go from one note to the next and not finish on the same note. And here's an example. Sorry, I can't see it because my hand's in the way. I'm going to deal with this. Let's try that. No, that's even worse. Let's try that. So these are the same two notes I started with. I should start with the same two notes. And he comes back to the same note, but then he goes. So the ornament ends up going down and not coming back to the same note. Or here's one going up. I'll start on this note, and it goes from here to here, and it goes from here, or from here to here. And this one's interesting. He jumps the octave. Oh, sorry, E. And he goes to a different note. Oh no, he's going from here to here. Let me try this again. He's going from here, it jumps the octave. And for a fifth, this one's more obvious. And he says, this may create bad parallels, but in the context and the speed these usually go, it probably doesn't matter. So he also talks about how to improvise a piece from scratch, and he gives an example of how to do that. And it's basically he takes an idea and then repeats it with a slight variation. And he gives an example of how you can build a piece this way, that you take an idea, you repeat it, you change it, that changed idea brings up a new idea. And I'll talk a little more about where this led later. I'll play this piece. It's the first of the solo ricercata, or he says it in Spanish, ricercata, because he was Spanish. Even though he published this both in Italian and Spanish. Apparently the Italian version is full of Spanish idioms. Anyway, I'll play it. He also talks about how to ornament in ensembles, and also how to ornament a choral piece in a way that you're either ornamenting the melody or some other part, or either the top part or some other part. Later on in the century, and in the 17th century especially, the Italians went crazy with this, and they called it viola bastarda. And I don't know where that term came from, but so I'm just guessing that the instrument is not just playing one part. The instrument is jumping from part to part in a madrigal. So I chose a madrigal based on probably on one of my ancestors. The French didn't call the madrigals, they called them chansons, but it's basically the same thing. It's a piece for 4 singers, and this one was clearly to be sung at drinking parties. I'll read the translation of the words to you. Martin was leading his pig to market with Alice, who in the fields besought Martin of sin, that they should lie together. He asks, "Hey, lass, who'll hold the pig?" "Oh," says Alice, "that's easy." Then she tied the pig to her leg, and Martin mounted heavily. The pig took fright, and Alice cried, "Hold on tight, Martin, the pig's running off with me." I initially thought that I would play this piece on the viol that I first played, but it's tuned in a different way, and I don't have much experience with tenor viols, and I don't like dealing with an F string, so I decided to play it on this viol, but it's a little bit of a high wire rack because it's really designed for a smaller viol. Wish me luck. I can't play it at the speed that it might have been played at the time, so you're not going to hear much of the screaming and yelping, but there's a certain amount of the same panic. So Dall'Acasa included this in his treatise on how to improvise. He was not a violin player primarily. He was actually a cornetto player, and apparently, in the days when he wrote this, people made this stuff up. They had all of the parts of the chanson or madrigal memorized, and they would jump from part to part, improvising this way. I don't know how they did it. I can't even begin to do something like that. So this is the best I can do, just kind of reading what you wrote. I think it's, let me just check and see what's happening next. I think it's time for a break. So I'm going to move to another instrument.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll take a short moment here. We just trying to dial in that instrument link. Yeah, lovely. Hey, Martin. It's just I'm really enjoying the ambiance and the stories and personally I'm running around serving tea, but I'm really loving what I'm hearing. So I hope you're enjoying yourselves as well. That is just the instrument link, so it can only be on at 9 o'clock. So the next tea that we're going to be serving is a Sencha Yabukita. So this tea is special to me because in October of 2021, so last year, we bought a tea roaster. And not many people know this, but Japanese sencha is generally finish fired at origin. And what finish firing looks like is something similar to, say, coffee roasting, but it's an open roaster. And they reduce the residual moisture from 5% to 4%. So it's just a very small whisper of heat. You don't see a transformation of color. Sencha is a green tea, the leaves are very vibrantly green. The finish firing process, which in Japanese is called hiire, is actually caramelizing the sugars a little bit. It's reducing a little bit of the tannin. It's creating a different kind of flavor. And farmers, or those who are doing the finish firing process, which isn't always the farmer, it's actually often not the farmer. You see, what normally happens is that the tea farmer will sell to a cooperative. The cooperative will sell to a tea company. The tea company will have farm in their name, but they're not necessarily growing tea. And they will blend different farms together, and then they will finish fire them. So again, a lot of parallels with coffee roasters. What we love to do is we love to buy directly from these farmers. One of the farmers we work with, Mr. Takaki in Fukuoka, he's a fantastic tea roaster. and we had him video call in and help us set the rotation of the drum, because the RPM is really important, how long the leaves are touching the drum, as well as the temperature, and there's different coordinates you have to hit, how hot the drum is when the leaves go in, what temperature you bring the leaves to. Then you need to let them cook at a particular temperature for a certain amount of time, and then you want to bring up the drum temperature, and then you want to bring up the leaf temperature as a result, and when you hit your end temperature, you then stop the process. It's really magical how transformative this is for the flavors, and at different times of year, you're going to use different temperatures. In the spring, you want to really bring out that florality. You really want it to taste like a shincha, but they'll take that, which means new tea, but it's essentially it's sencha that has a lighter roast. Whereas later on in the year, you're going to see them finish fire a little hotter. So 93 degrees centigrade will be 98 degrees centigrade. The tea that you're going to have next is one that I brought to 98 degrees centigrade. It's a yabukita, which is a cultivar of tea. There's, just like in apples, Gala, Red Delicious, Granny Smith, you know, there's so many different cultivars. In wine, Pinot Noir, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon. In tea, yabukita, the dabaihao that you just had, Okamidori, Tsukikari are different Japanese tea cultivars. This next tea is going to be a single cultivar yabukita, finished fired here, JagaSilk, and then we cold brewed it again, similar system. We used a little bit more leaf. I love the spinach-like quality of a really good Japanese sencha, where it has that really, maybe spinach isn't the right word, but it's got a nice thickness to it, and it has a lot of umami, and I think that's really fun to try and capture, especially in a cold brew. And we actually learned about cold brew tea from a Japanese, I guess through Japanese connections. This is back in 2005, I guess, but we've always, since around 2009, wanted to do this particular way of making tea, but it always goes bad so quickly. So we were really happy to get a pasteurizer and be able to do this year. So really stoked. So we're going to bring out the sencha yabukita for you next, okay?
This is a smaller vial, but it actually is tuned to the same notes as the other vial. The reason that can happen is that it uses wound strings on the bottom. Wound strings were invented in Bologna in the 1680s, and before that time, the strings all were plain gut, and you heard the sound. It's a lovely sound, but of course with the microphones it sounded pretty substantial, but without microphones, it's very soft, and I think you will notice quite a different sound coming from this vial, even though it's much smaller. It's the size that I suspect was commonly used for lira vial. There's a lot of discussion in early music circles about what lira viol was, but it was more a way of playing than a particular type of viol. But all of the people that mention lira viol in the old sources say that it is a smaller viol. So this is the smallest bass viol I've ever played, and so I think it's well suited for lira viol. The main attribute of lira viol playing is that the instruments can be tuned to lots of different tunings, and I think that's why small is better, because the string band is under as much tension, and therefore you can muck around with bizarre tunings and not break strings as often. That being said, the basic advice in the old methods is to tune the top string up until it nearly breaks. I don't know how you figure that out without it breaking, but anyway. You tune the top string up until it nearly breaks, and then you tune the other strings in accordance. There was no pitch standard, so I have this viol tuned to A = 440, which is a fairly high pitch for Baroque instruments. But there are tuning forks in England even as late as the 1800s, but certainly in the 16 and 1700s that go up to A4, A520 I think I saw. It was really, really high pitches. So there was as much as a fourth difference between the high and the low pitches in those days. And that's in the same location. Churches tended to have a much higher pitch than chamber music situations. And the reason for that is money. When you tune an organ, it's much more expensive to lengthen the pipes than it is to shorten them. So as the years progressed and the organ was tuned more and more often, it ended up higher and higher. And that's why there's always a big discussion with Bach's music, for instance, what pitch to play it at, because it's written so that the bottom singers, do I have this the right way? Yeah, it's written much lower than is comfortable. So you often have the bass singers going down to low C, which is almost impossible for choral singers these days. And it's because the pitch that he was writing for was for the organ in his church, which was at least a third higher than the usual. So it's always a problem. And of course, if you were hiring wind players whose instruments were at a lower pitch, then you had to write transpositions. So it becomes a really complicated issue. So I'm not going to be too complicated about this, but I am playing at 3 different pitches. I'm playing at A equals 440, which is the modern pitch today, and the next viol I'll be playing on is a whole tone lower, and then the viol I finish on is halfway between. This is the scariest part of the concert for me. That's why I'm avoiding playing. It's not only a very difficult piece, but the difference in size of viols is really, really throwing me. So I might have to stop a couple of times and just sort out what I'm doing. Hume was quite a character. He was a professional soldier and traveled throughout Europe as a mercenary, carrying his viol with him apparently. And when he came back to England, he wanted a job at court, but managed to offend so many people that he never did get the job that he wanted, and ended up in the poorhouse. Died very poor, very sick, and it's a sad ending. He wasn't just crass, although he certainly liked to write little ditties like "My mistress hath a pretty thing" and "Hit it in the middle." This piece that I'm going to play is called "Good Again." It seems to be the fourth of a series of pieces. His book is just all run-on, so you can't really tell. But it starts with the Soldier's Resolution, and then there's Death and Life, and Good Again is the last of the four pieces that seem to be part of this set. I am going to chicken out and give you the Reader's Digest version because we're running out of time and it's really hard. So you've got the beginning and the end. a minute about the bows and the bow hold. The bowing, there's a lot of discussion among early musicians, violin players, about how to hold the bow. And right now I'm following the instructions from Simpson, who's the next composer. His idea, according to his instructions, you hold the bow between three fingers, your index finger, your thumb, and your middle finger. He's talking about holding the wood of the bow, and you press the tip of your middle finger against the hair. It gives you a very firm grip on the bow, and he says if you're not strong enough, you can use two fingers on the hair, but really you're pressing with the index finger and the thumb, and the middle finger is simply stabilizing the bow. I will go on to Simpson. Play this prelude again, this time with the French bow hold, which is looser, and you hold the bow by the hair. Back to Simpson's way of holding the bow, which is a good way to play the next one. Intermission.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Oh, our result.
and then it became a suspended clock.
This is Iris's birthday.
That's usually how the marriage ends up.
That's usually how it goes. Broken glass and then he's picked up on something. I thought he was just good. He's actually, given that it's a long weekend and so much going on, I find that very good. And it was a long, long line of traffic, longer for the Saanich Fair. Long line. Before you even get on the road that leads to the fair. You've been there with Thomas.
Might be an idea to go into the sun.
Let's go have some money and I'll try to get us one thing. I have to get. See you again. Enjoy. Enjoy.
What about
We're gonna find. Yes. Yeah, it's hard.
By that time, she's on it.
I was going to ask, is this a standard feature of the architecture of this to have this extended piece just hovering in space?
Well, you sometimes
What's its
play it.
function? Yeah, so you need to be able to finger press against
Yes.
it up there. But it's just that it's suspended. Is that normal?
Well, you see that on violins and cellos too.
Yeah, I guess I've never noticed it.
Yeah. Right, yeah. It goes up even farther down with violins and cellos. And my last violin has a finger
Wow.
which was a mistake. I was negotiating with the maker who was restoring it. He misinterpreted it, so he made this really long fingerboard.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
No, they didn't take off.
How long would you like to take for the intermission?
Have a lesson because I don't know so much over time. It's up to you. But I need one up. People are going to watch.
It's perfect. back from the intermission. That was not announced, but happened. I'm sure Martin announced it, but I didn't say anything. Sorry about that, but here we are. I wanted to talk to you just quickly before we launch into the next section of the program about the next tea that we'll be serving. You've had a white tea, you've had a green tea, and what we're going to do next is an oolong. So oolongs, essentially the difference between a white tea, green tea, oolong, a lot of it has to do with the control over an enzyme called polyphenol oxidase, it's PPO enzyme. And the PPO enzyme is responsible for browning the leaf. So not a lot of people know this, but your green teas, your crimson teas, your oolongs, they all come from the same plant. And it's just a question of how it's processed that creates these different teas. This is a really special oolong. It's called the Nogue. It's from Wuyi Mountain, and Wuyi Mountain is famous for its Da Hong Pao. If anybody knows Da Hong Pao, pardon my terrible pronunciation. But Da Hong Pao, red robe tea is, if it's really the real deal, is worth a lot of money. This is not the Da Hong Pao, but it is grown in the area, and it's grown by a farmer who knows what he's doing. Nogue literally translates as cinnamon. That is the profile that the farmer is going for. And how they do this is quite fascinating. It has a lot to do with just how they manipulate those enzymes, this kind of active oxidation during the process of creating the tea, and choosing the right cultivars for the right mountain, for the right elevation, all of those things. And at the end of the day, at least in Wuyi, it's a common practice to when you're making these beautiful oolongs to oxidize them quite deeply and then charcoal roast them. So you get this really nice charcoal roast, cinnamon profile, and really happy to share it with you. There is another cake for anybody who's interested in the second slice. Does anybody want a second slice of cake? 1, 2, 5, 6. Okay, so maybe when I'm going around and I'm pouring your tea, you can give me just a gentle reminder that you're one of those people that just put up your hand. I have no way of actually. Awesome. That's what I'll do. Okay, thank you. And without further ado, we'll go back to Martin's program here, the Renaissance to the Baroque and Beyond. Big hand for Martin.
So this is a French, 7-string French viol. I think you'll notice, even with the microphones, that the tendency for instruments was to get a deeper and deeper sound, and the French in around 1700, between 1700 and 1720, that seemed to be the point when things got the deepest. It's the same thing with lutes. If you listen to lute recordings, the Renaissance lute is quite bright and clear, and then you hear these Baroque flutes, and the bottom end is just enormous in comparison. So I'll just play a few notes just to give you a sense. So that was the sound thereafter. I think my contention is that the more money you had, the bigger, deeper sound you were able to afford. And the French had almost unlimited money in those days. instrumentation is quite different from the Italians. The Italians like to fill in notes from one to the other, and the French like to decorate individual notes with trills, which got me a little tangled up in this piece. There are a lot of trills, and they all go different directions and involve certain awkward maneuvers with the fingers, so I apologize for the slightly odd ornaments. Most of you have seen the movie Tous les matins du monde, and it features the music of my brain's gone dead. Saint-Colombe. Saint-Colombe is a place name, it's not a person's name. And we're not absolutely sure who Saint-Colombe was. There's one faction that thinks it was Dr. Cour and another faction thinks it wasn't. There is proof that his first name was Jean, so we at least know that much. This is, I've described it in the program. This came to light fairly recently. It was in the last 10 to 15 years, up until, and even until the time that the movie was made of Tous les matins du monde. This music that I'm about to play had not come to light yet. There were no solo pieces by Saint-Colombe known. And a manuscript showed up, and this is the first piece in that manuscript, and it's got, I think, almost 200 pieces in it, so we're very lucky that this came to light, and now we have a lot of solo pieces by Saint-Colombe. This is the only one I've actually learned well enough to play in public, and it's the first one in the book. It happens to be a very good one. Favorite sets of directions on how to tune the viol is to tune all of the fourths as wide as you can stand, and the third as well. So I try to make them all equally out of tune. The octaves are in tune. Let's just check. So at the time that movie was made, the only thing that was known about this composer was that he practiced in his yard in a treehouse, and there's a story that Marais told that he sat under the treehouse and picked up tricks from his teacher while listening to him practice. So we'll see some of those tricks now in Les Voix Humaines, which I have decided not to play from beginning to end because there are many much better performances available. But what I'll do, this is really tiny. Well, I'll just play from this. I'll explain what my project for the last several years has been related to Marais. His music is highly marked. There are marks on quite a lot of the notes, and they're quite detailed. But it turns out that they're nowhere near as detailed as he was in his lessons. A manuscript has come to light in book 2. It's at the Sibley Library in Rochester, New York, and it has even more marks. So I'm now studying those marks, and it's completely changing my way of playing Marais. And I'm not really ready to play it in public, but I'll show you some of the things that I've discovered. I'll just go through the marks as I find them and explain what's going on. The first note has 1 finger vibrato on 2 notes. So that would be the notes he plays, but he wants vibrato, which is not easy to do. Now I could just turn on my cello vibrato, but I don't think that's what he meant. In those days, vibrato was an ornament. It wasn't just a part of the sound. So I think he wanted a kind of uncertain feel. The very next note has an enflé, which means crescendo, or which would translate to a modern musician as crescendo, but it's actually a gesture on 1 note, and it involves swelling and dying away, and it's on a weak note. Now, when I started playing Baroque music as part of this revival, you never accented upbeats. It was simply a no-no. And here we have Marais, note after note of upbeats with a swell. So it starts with this vibrato, and then swell, another swell toward the end of this note, another swell here, so we have, in the very first bar, every weak part of every note of the phrase has a swell on it. Now we have another 1 finger vibrato here. It's already a major 7th, which has enough vibration in it. It doesn't need vibrato as well. And in fact, a normal cello vibrato doesn't even carry through all that. So you have to figure out how to make that vibrato carry through the dissonance. And then he writes prep before this. He means to prepare your left hand for the new position. Now, when I learned this piece, I wanted to make it as connected as I could, but he writes prep, so he wants a little bit of space to prepare, and then grand, which means a large muscular arm. So I'll just play this phrase as I see it. explain some of the other marks. These are in the original. A little X before a note means pensée, which is that ornament. And you can do it more than once if you like. Underneath it says tire, which means to pull the bow. So I have to do it the same. This is all in the original. Another pansement. Here's a new mark. Mordant, to bite. I don't know. Bite. And then there's a pensée, pensée at the same time. Here's an interesting one. Vibrato with a swell at the end. Another swell on the weak beat. Another mordant. Now, not a whole lot of marks here. Here we have an enfilade. Here's an interesting mark. First of all, there's a roll. He writes to start on the lower note, roll across individual notes, and then coupe at the end, which means stop. Or cut. Now you can cut either by stopping the bow on the string, or by lifting the bow suddenly. I think lifting the bow suddenly sounds a little better. Now we have vibrato two notes in it, and another swell. This time we don't have the vibrato, what we have is an extra line, but he puts two enflées in there. Prepare. Monstro. So I'll play through this section. Section starts with a two-finger vibrato. Now there's a big discussion about what two-finger vibrato means. Basically, you're supposed to hold one finger close to the finger that's playing the note and touch the string lightly with that finger. And it could either be done with standard cello vibrato, which is shocking enough, or you can do it as a trill. And viol players argue about that. There's a camp that says it's a trill and a camp that says it's vibrato. So I start with a trill and then add vibrato at the end. So I got a foot in each camp. And then at the end of this note, there's supposed to be a swell. So it's very expressive. Another swell. Here he writes, and I often misinterpret it, he says, no bite. Obviously in the lesson, the student was grabbing this note, and he wants no bite. Now here's an interesting one, a bite in the middle of the bow. I don't even know how to do it. So it's here. precise with his marks in the swells. In this case, the swell is over the dot at the end of the note. So just before the fast notes is where he wants the swell. And it's the same here. Sorry. And again here on the swell, and then the dot. And again here. Well, I'm not sure. This one might be on this note. I think that's where it is. Now he writes égal, obviously the student who is taking the lesson, and I'm not sure whether the lesson was from Murray. No one knows who actually added these marks. It was either Murray himself or a student of Murray. He writes égal, and the student obviously was distorting the rhythm, so he wanted those notes in time. Here's a coupé, and there's a rest on this one. Swell, swell again, swell. And here, there's a swell just before, and then a coupé at the end, just before you play, and it's a horrible fingering. I can't play it. I'm still struggling with that. It's the grand stroke, big stroke. So I'll play this section, although it's the least developed so far, so just forgive some of the weirdness. Time for me to change instruments.
May I interject with a question?
Yeah.
On the likeness of the face at the head of your instrument, who's depicted there? Do you know this?
I don't know.
Have you thought of an answer? Do you invent one sometimes?
Yeah. The story is there's a player in town, very talented player, but very shy, doesn't ever play in public, doesn't even want to play with other people. He commissioned this instrument from the maker in 2004, and I could ask him, but we're both gay men. I love beards, and I think he does too. So I think it's really about the beard.
Very curious. Thank you.
I will change instruments.
Okay. So that brings us, I guess, to the fourth T in the series. So if you're following along. in the program, this last section of the performance, you're set to have a crimson tea. So you might be asking yourself what a crimson tea is. A crimson tea is essentially a black tea. So what we call black tea in North America is called a crimson or red tea in China, Japan, Korea. So we choose to call it crimson tea, aka black tea, because the genre of black tea already existed before the English renamed crimson tea black tea. So we have to call black tea dark tea. A very famous dark tea, or true black tea, is Puer. That's a good example. But anybody making, like, there is actually a kurocha in Japan where they're doing fermented dark teas as well. But today we're going to be doing basically the deepest oxidation that you get generally out of Camellia sinensis when you're processing this way. This is going to be a juicy peach. It's called. It's a Chilan. So it's a Phoenix Mountain cultivar. In China, in Guangdong, China, there's a mountain. There's lots of Phoenix mountains, but it's a particularly famous one in Guangdong that is also made famous, the Chilan cultivar. This Chilan was used by the farmer that you just had, who did the Rogue, that oolong that you had. He took this Phoenix Mountain cultivar and he's growing it on Wuyi Mountain. So it's the same farmer as so your third and your fourth teas are going to be from the same farmer. He sent it to us and he called it Juicy Peach. And if anybody was here last time, you'll know that I'm not really going to be excited about a tea called Juicy Peach because I'm going to assume that it's got added scents. And I understand the importance of scented tea for getting people interested in tea, just like scented coffee is a thing. You know, there's a wine, like, I don't know. Personally though, I really love to explore the complex flavors that are possible without adding anything to the tea. I think it's so much more interesting to look at what's possible when the farmer does complex manipulation of the enzymatic process to create really gorgeous flavors. And that's what's happened here. So when I had this tea, I was like, okay, I can see why he broke with convention here. This is a very, like, you can taste the peach, but it's not in this aggressive, unpleasant way. It's just a really interesting part of the full flavor experience. So it's a lighter tea. So you've had, I think the Senchei Abukita, we purposely made it a little bit more intense. And the Rogue had that really nice, rich mouthfeel. This is just a nice, I think, almost like I could have glass after, I could drink the whole bottle of the of the Juicy Peach. So we'll bring some of that Chilan crimson tea out for you for this last session. So we're almost through. So yeah.
played an outdoor concert a couple of weeks ago where I said that you can always tell what style a piece is in, whether it's in the French or the Italian style, by whether the composer wrote the titles of the movements in French or Italian. But in this case, it's completely misleading. The piece is clearly in the French style, even though most of the movement names are kind of in a pidgin Italian. The only one that's in French is the sarabande, but they're clearly all in the French style. This viol this is one of those Stradivarius in the added stories. I was on a kind of uncomfortable mission trying to sell an instrument, a cello, by a student of mine who was dying of cancer. And the cello was terrible. I didn't want to sell it in town, so I went to Seattle, and the woman behind the counter at the violin shop said, we struck up conversation. She said, well, I had this old German viol sitting in my closet. Are you interested in seeing it? I said, well, of course. So I took I went to her place, and she pulled out this viol, and there were some pretty strange things about it. It had been converted to a cello, and she had a guitar maker convert it back into a viol, and the conversion was okay, but not very successful. It didn't sound all that great, and it didn't look in very good condition. But she said, well, would you like to buy it? And so I offered her a few $1,000s for it, and she took the cash, so that was fine. And I was, quite a few years later, I had it restored to a condition where it really plays well. And I was at Colin Tilney's house, and the person who wrote the book on Tilka viols, whose father wrote the original book, and he was going around the world, his son was going around the world checking every Tilka viol that was in existence, happened to be there at the same time I was visiting. And I said, well, I have this funny old German viol, would you like to have a look at it? And I pulled it out of the case, went back to my house, and brought it to Colin Tilney's and pulled it out of the case. And Mr. Friedman's wife's eyes got really big when I pulled it out. He said, well, do you know what you have? And I said, well, no. He said, well, this is from Tilke's shop. Now, Tilke is the kind of Stradivarius of viol makers. Everybody wants a Tilke viol. He identified it as having been made in the last year of Tilke's life, when he was 91. So it's not all Tilke for sure. But I'll show the back, which is definitely Tilke. And he went up to try the viol out to take photographs of it, and came back and said, that viol sounds beautiful. Now this is someone who'd seen and played every extant viol in the world, Tilke viol, so I feel pretty lucky to have found this thing. I don't know how it sounds outdoors. This is the first time I've played it outdoors. I hope it works. Giga. The last great virtuoso on the viol before it fell out of favor was Abel, and he was the son of the viol and cello player in the court at Köthen, where Bach worked. That's basically where he composed most of his non-religious music. Bach was very happy in that court, and one of my favorite stories about Abel is that there's a recommendation written by Bach for Abel, and I can just imagine this young kid viol player going up to Mr. Bach and saying, "Would you mind writing a recommendation for me?" I would never have the nerve, but Abel did very well for himself. He became great friends of one of Bach's sons and moved to England. Unfortunately, he became a serious alcoholic and died of alcoholism. And apparently toward the end of his life, he still played beautifully, but they had to be sure to tune the viol before they put it in his hands. And then he would play in a rapturous style, but he was so soused that he couldn't do anything else. from a collection that was in Gainsborough's house and then ended up in the New York Public Library. Gainsborough was a big fan of Abel and housed him, and I think these were pieces. I think this is in Abel's handwriting. These were pieces that he was teaching, probably to Gainsborough or at least one of his relatives. There's a particular place that I wish I had taken advantage of today, where there's an X and then there's another X for all the hard stuff, and you can skip over that, and I should have done that today. One more. That's my party piece. It's the piece I know the best, and I did not review it today, which was not a good idea. This piece I found about 25 years ago, and David Loeb is very interested in writing music for early instruments. the viol did not completely die out. The French Revolution really did a number on it because the Viola Da Gamba was the instrument of the royalty. And after the French Revolution, nobody wanted to be caught dead with one. So a lot of the viols disappeared, and certainly the playing the viol was no longer fashionable. But it did actually continue right through the 19th century, and the revival of the viol really started early in the 20th century. My teacher was a young student in Berlin, and by then the Bach, St. Matthew Passion and St. John Passion were a regular feature of concerts. So the principal cellist in the Berlin Philharmonic played the solo, famous solo in the St. Matthew Passion. He was using an end pin, he was using no frets, but he was playing a viol. But my teacher, who went to the performance, was not impressed. She said, "If that be viol play, I'd rather wash dishes." Some of the pieces were slower than I intended, but that's not like it happens today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Another big hand for Martin.
Yeah.
And thank you everybody for coming out to session 5 of 6 in our musical tea series. Hopefully we can have you down here again in October. My band, Truth and Dalton, will be performing, as well as Steve Schmiller, a wonderful visual arts painter, will be performing. We'll be doing the final session in the series. Martin, if people want to find more of your work, or if they want to see you performing in the future, is there any way to do that, or is it just kind of, this was their lucky moment? And
Their lucky moment.
Okay, all right. Okay.
I'll try house concerts.
Okay.
So you can stay in touch with the EMSI, the Early Music Society of the Islands. I've recently joined the board, and so we're trying to get community involvement. And so if we'll get the mailing list from those guys.
Yeah, there you go. You can definitely connect to us.
Yes.
Early Music Society of the Islands, definitely encourage you to check it out if you haven't. It's an amazing society. They put on wonderful early music, and we're huge fans, my wife and I. And yeah.
and I am hoping to play house concerts. Lloyd and I live in a very nice place where house concerts can take place.
Amazing. Okay. Well, looking forward to it. We'll definitely promote his concerts on our website if you let us know about it, or at least on our social media. So yeah, excited. Okay. Again, yeah, thank you so much. When you're leaving, if you could do me a favor, if you could I'm still trying to be COVID careful as much as possible. Could you please put your compost in the compost bin right there, and then your glasses on this table here. And if you can't, for whatever reason, or you just don't feel comfortable moving delicates, I totally understand. Just leave them on the table. We will collect them, no problem whatsoever. And yeah, thank you again for coming. Really appreciate it, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your weekend.